1. The Attendant at Pump 4. There's a special kind of loneliness that only exists on the American interstate system after midnight. It's a vast, humming quiet where the only signs of life are the rhythmic thump-thump of your own tires on the asphalt and the distant, lonely lights of other travelers, each trapped in their own metal bubble. My name is Maya, and as a college student driving the 16-hour stretch from my campus in Colorado back home to Illinois for winter break, I was an expert in that particular brand of loneliness. My mistake was trying to save time. Instead of sticking to the brightly lit, well-traveled I-80, my GPS had convinced me to take a shortcut through a desolate stretch of rural Nebraska. For 2 hours, I hadn't seen another car. The landscape was a flat, featureless expanse of snow-covered fields under a starless, ink-black sky. My gaslight had been on for the last 30 miles, and a cold, sharp panic was starting to set in. Every exit I passed was a ghost ramp, leading to nowhere. The signs for services faded and rusted. Just as I was about to resign myself to spending a freezing night on the side of the highway, I saw it. A single, flickering, yellow light in the distance. As I got closer, it resolved into a gas station sign, a relic from another era. The sign read, "Prairie Gas, always open." The allways flickered erratically, buzzing with a sick, yellow light. The station was a dump, a single, small building with grimy windows and 2 ancient-looking pumps under a sagging metal awning. It was the kind of place you see in horror movies, the kind of place your dad tells you to never, ever stop at. But with my fuel gauge needle buried in the red, I didn't have a choice. I pulled in, the crunch of my tires on the gravel, the only sound. The air was dead still. A single bare bulb above the station door cast long, distorted shadows. An old man was sitting on a stool inside the glass booth, motionless, staring out into the darkness. He was pale and incredibly thin. His skin stretched taut over his skull like old parchment. I got out of my car, the cold hitting me like a physical blow. The pump was old school. It didn't have a card reader. Pay inside, a faded, hand-painted sign instructed. I walked to the glass booth. The old man didn't look at me. He didn't move a muscle. I had to tap on the glass to get his attention. He turned his head slowly, his movements stiff and jerky, like a rusty machine. His eyes were the palest blue, cloudy and unfocused. "Pumps on," he rasped, his voice a dry, dusty whisper that seemed to cost him a great deal of effort. He didn't ask how much I wanted. He just pointed a long, bony finger towards the pump on the right. Pump 4. I walked back to my car, a strange, creeping unease settling over me. The nozzle of Pump 4 was ice cold, the metal seeming to draw the warmth right out of my hand. As I stuck it in my tank and squeezed the handle, I expected the familiar roar of the pump's motor. But there was only silence. The numbers on the old mechanical display, however, were spinning, the gallons and the price clicking over with an unnatural speed. It was filling my tank, but it was doing it in complete silence. That's when I heard the whisper. It came from a small, crackly speaker on the pump, the kind used for intercoms. It was faint, a dry, rustling sound, like dead leaves blowing across pavement. So empty. I froze, my hand tight on the handle. "Hello?" I called out. Only the wind answered. I shook my head, convinced I was hearing things. The exhaustion, the loneliness, my mind was playing tricks on me. The pump clicked off, the tank full. It had taken less than 30 seconds to pump 15 gallons, which was impossible. Shaken, I went back to the booth to pay. I held my credit card up to the glass. The old man just stared at it, his cloudy eyes uncomprehending. Then he slowly shook his head and pointed to a small, handwritten sign taped to the inside of the glass. Cash only. My heart sank. I never carried cash. I frantically dug through my wallet, my purse. I managed to scrounge together $23 in crumpled bills and change. "This is all I have," I said, pushing it through the small metal slot. He took the money with his slow, deliberate movements, his fingers as cold and dry as bone when they brushed against mine. He didn't count it. He just swept it into a wooden drawer. Then he looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time, his pale eyes seemed to focus on me with a sudden, startling clarity. "It's enough," he whispered, "for now." I didn't wait for a reply. I ran back to my car, jumped in, and sped away from that place, my tires spitting gravel. I didn't look back. I drove for what felt like an hour, my fear slowly giving way to a strange, profound exhaustion. It was more than just road weariness. It was a deep cellular fatigue, a feeling of being drained. I felt hollowed out. My car started to sputter. I looked down at the dashboard in disbelief. The fuel gauge, which had been on full just an hour ago, was now on empty again. But that wasn't possible. My car was fuel efficient. A full tank should have lasted me another 400 miles. The engine died. I coasted to a stop on the side of the dark, empty highway. I was stranded again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just the car that was empty. It was me, the energy, the life. It felt like it had been siphoned right out of me. I sat there in the dark, shivering, the cold from outside seeping in, and I remembered the whisper from the pump. So empty. It hadn't been talking about my gas tank. After what felt like an eternity, I saw headlights approaching in my rearview mirror. A massive tow truck pulled up behind me, its yellow emergency lights bathing my car in a sickly, pulsing glow. A large, burly man with a kind, weathered face got out and walked to my window. "Looks like you're in a bit of a pickle, miss," he said, his voice a warm, welcome sound. "My car. It just died," I said, my voice shaking. "I just filled up the tank, but it's empty." He shone his flashlight on my car, then looked back at me, his expression turning grim. "You didn't happen to stop at that old Prairie gas station back on 136, did you?" I stared at him, my blood turning to ice. "Yes. How did you know?" He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "I was afraid of that. Did you use pump 4? "Yes," I whispered. He shook his head slowly, leaning against my car door. "Folks round here have a story about that place. It ain't a real gas station. Not anymore. Hasn't been for 50 years. The man who runs it, old Silas, he was the first one it took." "Took? What do you mean, took?" "The story goes," he said, his voice dropping low, "that something lives under that land. Something ancient and hungry. Something that sleeps for decades, but when it wakes up, it needs to feed. It doesn't feed on gas, miss. It feeds on the spark, the energy of things, life, electricity, warmth, whatever it can get. It uses the station as a lure for tired, lonely travelers." He pointed his flashlight at my car's engine. "Your battery is completely dead. So is your alternator. Every wire is cold as ice. The gas you paid for? It just pumps that right into a holding tank in the ground. A little offering to keep the thing happy. But what you really pay with, that's what it takes from pump 4. I thought of the impossible speed at which the tank had filled, the profound, draining exhaustion I had felt, the whisper. I felt sick. "What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling. No one knows, the tow truck driver said, looking out at the dark prairie. They just call it the Attendant. And Silas, the fella in the booth, he's just the empty shell it leaves behind to welcome the next meal. He helped me into his warm truck and towed my dead car to the nearest town. The mechanics there were baffled. They said my car was like a ghost. Every system was pristine, but completely devoid of any electrical charge. It was a total loss. I eventually made it home, but a part of me never left that cold, dark stretch of Nebraska highway. The exhaustion, the feeling of being hollowed out, never completely went away. There's a permanent chill in my bones that no blanket can warm. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm in a quiet room, I can still hear a faint whisper in the back of my mind, a dry, rustling voice, hungry and patient. So empty. Story 2. The Night Shift at Exit 281. There's a rhythm to working the graveyard shift at a remote gas station. It's a slow, hypnotic beat punctuated by the hum of the freezers, the distant roar of a passing semi, and the frantic buzzing dance of moths around the fluorescent lights. You become a connoisseur of loneliness, the quiet desperation in the eyes of a cross-country trucker, the frantic energy of a college kid running on caffeine and regret, the weary emptiness of a family driving through the night. My name is Dale, and for a year, I was the king of this lonely little kingdom. A 24/7 gas and go off a desolate stretch of I-80 in Nevada. The station was an island of light in an ocean of darkness. The nearest town was 50 miles away. Most nights were quiet, a slow drip of customers, until the sun began to hint at the horizon. It was a boring job, but it was a job. It paid the bills for my online classes. I thought I had seen every kind of road-weary soul the interstate had to offer. Then, one night in the deep of winter, I realized some souls never leave the road at all. The night started like any other, cold, clear, and utterly silent. The only sound was the soft hiss of the coffee machine and the low, droning hum of the refrigerated drink coolers. Around 2 a.m., I was wiping down the counter when a car pulled up to the pumps. It was an older model, a station wagon from the 80s, the kind with fake wood paneling on the sides. It was caked in road grime and rust. A man got out. He was tall and thin, wearing a worn denim jacket that was completely inadequate for the desert cold. He moved with a strange, hesitant stiffness, as if he were unsure of his own limbs. He fumbled with the gas pump for a full minute before figuring out how to get the nozzle into his tank. I watched him through the large plate glass window, a mild curiosity breaking through my boredom. After he finished pumping his gas, he walked towards the store. The automatic doors hissed open, and a blast of cold air followed him in. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to the back of the store, to the coolers. I could see his reflection in the curved security mirror in the corner. He just stood there, staring at the rows of brightly colored energy drinks. He didn't move a muscle. He just stood and stared. After about 5 minutes of this, a chill started to creep up my spine. This was beyond the usual late-night weirdness. "Can I help you find something, sir?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet store. He didn't turn around. He didn't acknowledge me in any way. He just kept staring at the cooler doors. Then, he did something that made my blood run cold. He raised his hand slowly and pressed it flat against the glass of the cooler door. The glass instantly frosted over. Where his hand touched it, a perfect white handprint blooming on the surface. The hum of the cooler's compressor motor suddenly strained, groaning as if under immense load, and the lights in the entire store flickered. I backed away from the counter, my hand reaching for the silent alarm button underneath. As suddenly as it started, it stopped. He dropped his hand. The frost print remained on the glass. The light steadied. He then turned, and for the first time, he looked at me. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes dark, hollow pits. But it wasn't a look of malice. It was a look of profound, infinite confusion, like a man who had woken up in a country where he didn't speak the language. He walked to the counter and placed a single crumpled dollar bill on it. "For the gas," he said, his voice a dry, hoarse whisper that sounded like it hadn't been used in years. "Sir, the gas was $28, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He just stared at the dollar bill, then back at me, the confusion in his eyes deepening. "It's all I have," he whispered. He then turned and walked out of the store, the automatic doors hissing shut behind him. I watched him get back into his old, beat-up station wagon and drive away, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a long time, my heart hammering. I was about to call the police, but what would I say? A strange man? Underpaid for gas? I decided to check the cooler first. I walked to the back of the store. The handprint was still there, a perfect ghostly white shape on the glass. I touched it. The glass was so cold, it felt like it burned my fingers. I looked inside the cooler. Every single can and bottle in that section was frozen solid. Some of them split open. Their contents turned to slushy ice. It was impossible. The coolers were set to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Shaken, I went back to the counter and looked at the crumpled dollar bill he had left. It was old, the paper soft and worn, a silver certificate from the 1950s. The rest of the night was quiet, but the fear remained, a cold knot in my stomach. Just before my shift ended at sunrise, a highway patrol officer pulled in for his morning coffee. He was a regular, a friendly old cop named Miller. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Dale," he said, pouring himself a cup. On impulse, I told him the story. I told him about the strange man, the old car, the frozen drinks, the dollar bill. I expected him to laugh. He didn't. He just listened, his expression growing serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "An old station wagon with wood paneling?" he finally asked. "Yeah, that's right," I said. He just stared at the dollar bill, then back at me, the confusion in his eyes deepening. "It's all I have," he whispered. He then turned and walked out of the store, the automatic doors hissing shut behind him. I watched him get back into his old, beat-up station wagon and drive away, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there for a long time, my heart hammering. I was about to call the police, but what would I say? A strange man? Underpaid for gas? I decided to check the cooler first. I walked to the back of the store. The handprint was still there, a perfect ghostly white shape on the glass. I touched it. The glass was so cold, it felt like it burned my fingers. I looked inside the cooler. Every single can and bottle in that section was frozen solid. Some of them split open. Their contents turned to slushy ice. It was impossible. The coolers were set to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Shaken, I went back to the counter and looked at the crumpled dollar bill he had left. It was old, the paper soft and worn, a silver certificate from the 1950s. The rest of the night was quiet, but the fear remained, a cold knot in my stomach. Just before my shift ended at sunrise, a highway patrol officer pulled in for his morning coffee. He was a regular, a friendly old cop named Miller. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Dale," he said, pouring himself a cup. On impulse, I told him the story. I told him about the strange man, the old car, the frozen drinks, the dollar bill. I expected him to laugh. He didn't. He just listened, his expression growing serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. An old station wagon with wood paneling? He finally asked. Yeah, that's right, I said. And the guy was tall, skinny, looked confused? Exactly. Miller sighed and took a long sip of his coffee. You're not the first one to see him, kid. We get a call about him every few years. Always the same story, same car, same guy. He shows up at one of the lonely gas stations out on this stretch, buys gas, and disappears. We've been looking for him for 30 years. Looking for him? For what? His name was Arthur Finch, Miller said, his voice low. He was a family man, a school teacher. Back in the winter of '93, he was driving his family home from a trip. His wife, his 2 kids, their car broke down out here, somewhere near this exit. A blizzard hit. No one could get to them. They found the car a week later. They had run out of gas trying to keep the heater on. The whole family, they froze to death inside that station wagon. I stared at him, the coffee pot I was holding feeling impossibly heavy in my hand. We think, Miller continued, his eyes distant, that he's still out here, still trying to get gas, still trying to get home. He doesn't know he's dead. He's just stuck on that last, desperate task. The image of the man's confused, hollow eyes flashed in my mind. The single, crumpled dollar bill. It's all I have. He wasn't just confused. He was trapped in a memory, a time when $1 might have been enough to get him home. And the handprint? I whispered. The frozen drinks? Miller shrugged. Who knows? Some folks say the dead are cold. Maybe he just carries the cold with him. Or maybe he's trying to take the warmth, trying to get enough heat to finish his journey. After that night, the job was never the same. Every lone car that pulled in after midnight sent a jolt of fear through me. Every quiet, strange customer made me wonder. The loneliness of the night shift was no longer just boring, it was menacing. The silence was no longer empty, it was listening. I quit a few months later. I couldn't take the quiet anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was working in a waiting room for the dead. I live in the city now. I'm surrounded by noise and light. But sometimes, on the coldest winter nights, when I'm driving on an empty street, I'll see an old beat-up car parked on the side of the road, and I'll feel a familiar chill. And I know that Arthur Finch is still out there, still driving his family on a road that no longer exists, still running on empty, forever trying to complete that one last impossible task before the cold sets in for good. Story 3, the pump that remembers. There's a smell to a gas station that gets into your soul after a while. A mixture of gasoline fumes, stale coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of cheap air fresheners trying to cover up the smell of despair. I know that smell better than I know my own name. I'm Mark, and for the last 5 years, I've been the sole overnight attendant at the Last Chance Gas and Go, a lonely outpost on a forgotten stretch of highway in eastern Oregon. They call this the High Desert, and at night, it feels like the surface of the moon, vast, silent, and indifferent. My station is a tiny island of fluorescent light in a sea of sagebrush and darkness. The truckers mostly stick to the big Interstate 50 miles south, so my customers are usually lost tourists, local ranchers, or kids driving cars they can't afford. It's a quiet life. I read a lot of paperback novels and watch the slow, predictable dance of headlights appearing on the horizon, growing brighter and then fading away again. The strangeness is centered on Pump 3. It's the oldest pump on the lot, a rusty, mechanical beast from the 1970s that the owner a cheap old man named Henderson refuses to replace. It's unreliable. The numbers on its spinning mechanical display sometimes stick, and the automatic shutoff is shot, meaning you have to listen carefully or you'll end up with a puddle of gasoline at your feet. Most people avoid it. I try to direct customers to the other, more modern pumps, but sometimes, when it's busy, someone will pull up to pump 3, and sometimes, pump 3 remembers. I first noticed it about a year ago. A young couple in a beat-up Honda pulled up to pump 3. They were arguing, their angry whispers cutting through the quiet night. The girl was crying. They bought $10 worth of gas and sped off. An hour later, another car, a pickup truck this time, used the same pump. The driver, a grizzled old rancher, came in to pay. "Pump 3, he said, then paused, a strange look on his face. "You know, the weirdest thing just happened. While I was pumping my gas, I could have sworn I heard a young couple arguing, clear as day. Sounded like they were right next to me, but there was no one there. I dismissed it as a trick of the wind, but it happened again a week later. A trucker used pump 3, and when he came in, he complained about hearing a baby crying. The night before, a young family with a fussy infant had used that pump. Pump 3 was recording sounds, and it was playing them back. It wasn't a constant thing. It was random, unpredictable. Sometimes weeks would go by with nothing, but always, on the quietest, coldest nights, the pump would share its ghosts. It never played back the mundane, the sound of an engine, the weather report from a car radio. It only ever replayed moments of high emotion, an argument, a fit of laughter, a baby's cry, a desperate whispered phone call. It was as if the pump was absorbing the emotional residue of the people who used it. I started keeping a log, a secret journal of the pump's echoes. It became a strange, morbid hobby. I felt like an archivist of forgotten moments, the lonely curator of a museum of emotions. The stories the pump told were small, human tragedies and comedies. A breakup, a proposal, a confession. I never told Henderson. He'd think I was crazy. And besides, a part of me was fascinated. The pump was my only real companion on those long, silent nights. The night everything changed started with a car I should have recognized as a bad omen. It was a muscle car, a late 60s Dodge Charger. Its black paint job so perfect, it seemed to drink the light. It pulled up to pump 3 with a low, predatory rumble. The driver's window was tinted so dark, I couldn't see inside. The car just sat there for a long time, its engine idling, a deep, threatening vibration that I could feel in the floor of my booth. Finally, the door opened, and a man got out. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, and moved with a coiled, dangerous energy. He didn't look at me. He walked to the pump, put the nozzle in his car, and began to fill the tank. He never came inside. When he was done, he just got back in his car and drove away, a little too fast, his tires squealing on the asphalt. I waited for him to come in and pay. He never did. A drive-off. It happens sometimes. I sighed, made a note of the license plate, and prepared to call the non-emergency police line to file a report. That's when the pump started to remember. Usually, the echoes were faint, just whispers. This was different. A voice blasted from the pump's old, crackly intercom speaker, so loud and clear, it made me jump. It was a man's voice, filled with a cold, smug cruelty. "You think you can run? You think you can hide from me out here in the middle of nowhere?" There was another voice, A woman's, choked with sobs. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone. I swear." "It's too late for promises," the man's voice sneered. "You saw my face." The sound of a struggle, a scream, cut short, and then a sickening, wet, crunching sound. It was followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged. And then, silence. I stood frozen behind my counter, my entire body numb with horror. That wasn't an argument. That wasn't a breakup. What I had just heard, what Pump 3 had just, argument. That wasn't a breakup. What I had just heard, what Pump 3 had just remembered, was a murder. The man in the black Charger, he hadn't just stolen gas. My hands shaking, I picked up the phone and dialed 911. I told the dispatcher what I had heard, what I had seen. I knew how it sounded, a ghost story, a prank. But the terror in my voice must have been convincing. They said they were sending a patrol car, but it would be at least an hour. For the next hour, I was a wreck. I locked the doors to the store and sat in the back room, watching the security cameras, my heart pounding at every shadow. I replayed the recording in my mind. The man's voice, the woman's scream, the sound of dragging. And then I realized something that made my blood run even colder. The sound of the dragging, it hadn't faded out, as if someone were walking away. It had stopped abruptly, right at the pump. With a dawning, sickening dread, I remembered the old stories about this stretch of desert. The stories the old-timers told about the early days of the highway, before the interstate was built. Stories about people who vanished without a trace, their cars found abandoned, their bodies never recovered. They said the desert itself was hungry. They said there were places, thin places, where the ground was not as solid as it seemed. My station was built on top of an old, abandoned set of underground fuel storage tanks from the 1950s. Henderson had them filled with dirt and sealed decades ago. All except one, the one directly under Pump 3. That tank had been ruptured somehow, and it was deemed too unstable and dangerous to fill. It was just an empty, cavernous, concrete-lined hole in the ground. I looked at my security monitor, at the image of the rusty old pump sitting silently under the buzzing lights. What if the pump wasn't just remembering a sound? What if it was remembering a final resting place? The sound of a car pulling into the station made me jump. I looked at the monitor. It was the black Dodge Charger. It had come back. It parked not at the pump, but directly in front of the store, its headlights blinding my cameras. The driver's door opened. The man got out. He walked slowly, deliberately towards the front door of the store. He tried the handle. It was locked. He didn't knock. He didn't shout. He just stood there, a tall, dark silhouette against the glare of his own headlights. He looked directly at the security camera, as if he knew I was watching, and he smiled. Then he turned and walked back towards Pump 3. He stood next to it for a moment, and then he did something that defied all logic. He placed his hands on the heavy metal pump, and he began to push. The pump, a half-ton of steel and iron bolted to a concrete island, began to move. With a deep, groaning screech of tortured metal, it tilted, then toppled over onto its side. Where the pump had been, there was now a dark, circular hole in the ground, the entrance to the old, empty fuel tank. The man peered down into the hole. Then he looked back at the store, back at the camera, and he waved. A slow, mocking, final wave. And then he jumped into the darkness. I sat there, paralyzed, staring at the monitor, the empty space where the man had been, the toppled pump, the black, gaping hole in the concrete. When the police finally arrived, The scene was exactly as I had seen it. The pump was on its side. The hole was open. They brought in heavy-duty lights and looked down into the tank. It wasn't empty. The bottom of the tank was littered with the bones of dozens of bodies in various states of decay. A grim, secret graveyard that had been hiding in plain sight for 50 years. They found the fresh body of the woman from the recording, and at the bottom of the pile, they found the man from the black Charger. The police said it looked like he had died from the fall, but his face was frozen in a rictus of pure abject terror, as if the last thing he saw was not the bottom of the tank, but something else waiting for him in the darkness. The station was shut down. It became a massive crime scene. My logbook of the pump's echoes became the key piece of evidence in a dozen cold cases. The hungry desert had finally given up its dead. I don't work at a gas station anymore. I can't stand the smell. I can't stand the quiet, but I still have the nightmares. And in my nightmares, I am back at the Last Chance Gas and Go. It's always 3 a.m. The air is cold and silent, and I can hear a faint, crackly voice whispering from the darkness of an open hole in the ground, and it's telling me all of its secrets.